Great. So a big welcome and sort of hello to familiar faces and a welcome for the first time to a few of you that I haven't met before. My name is Anna Burley and I am the Policy Officer for the Co-operative Party. And apologies that you all have been spammed by me a lot for the last 2 months. We've been working on our Owning the Future report, and this is our best and last in our series of Owning the Future Wednesday discussions and our final chapter. And before I start and I introduce our guest, I will do a quick bit of housekeeping. The first is that we record these sessions. That means that people who can't join us live can catch up afterwards. We put it up on YouTube. So if you want to watch again or you want to send it to colleagues or friends, please feel free. Just worth noting that if you have your camera on, there's a chance that you'll be included in the recording. If you don't want to be included, you can turn your camera off with the stop video button at the bottom left. If you do have your camera on, please be conscious that you should probably be wearing more than just pajamas. That'd be brilliant. The second thing is that you'll see that you're all muted. Just so that we can hear Alan really well and we can hear everyone asking questions clearly, please keep yourself muted for the call unless I call on you to ask a question. There are a number of ways you can ask a question. One is there's a participate button at the bottom. If you click that, it puts your hand up and I can see it on the screen that you'd like to say something. Another is using the chat function, either to myself or the Co-operative Party, which is my colleague Izzy hiding behind the B symbol. You can use that one and I'll be monitoring that for questions as well. If both of those options fail, you can get hold of Izzy on events@party.coop to send your questions over. So in theory, that should cover everything. Sometimes we don't manage to get everybody's question in and I'm happy to forward anything on to Alan after the discussion, if there's sort of things you'd like to flag or raise. So we've got 74 of you on, which is fabulous. 75 with former colleague Caitlin joining now. So sort of, Alan, you're one of our big draws. You're beating many of your colleagues in terms of the number of people you attract to the party. So well done and thanks for joining. Dr Alan Whitehead is the MP, one of the MPs in Southampton, but he is also Shadow Minister for Energy and the Green New Deal. He is hugely knowledgeable on these areas, and so while I've asked him to stick to 5 to 10 minutes, anyone who's particularly passionate about this should get involved in CERA and get in touch with Alan separately, because he has a wealth of knowledge and ideas about how we can have a just and sustainable and sort of high-tech and exciting transition to a green future. So I will hand over to Alan, and then after he's spoken, I'll give you a quick chat about some of the ideas we cover in the chapter published today, and then we will open it up for questions. So over to you, Alan.
Thanks very much, Anna, and thank you for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. As Anna has alluded to, part of my problem in talking about these things is I tend to go on at great length and exceed my time very substantially, so I'll try and cut it down as much as possible so we can get questions and discussions in. And I'll therefore just, I think, talk about some of the headlines in this issue rather than the particular depth. And the first thing I want to say is that we've got a number of phrases and words now bandied around in this area, some of which are easily understandable, some of which are less understandable. So we have at the moment the requirement for a green recovery. We have the Green New Deal in place. We have net zero and the imperative of getting to net zero as soon as possible, and also understanding what net zero actually means compared with a number of the targets that we've had previously as far as a low carbon economy is concerned. So I'll try and deal with those particular things that have been bandied around in short order, and emphasize the difference between them. And I think emphasize in terms of the Green New Deal, just how transformational that has to be across the piece in terms of getting to that net zero target. We think as close as possible to 2030 rather than 2050, which is what is now in law, as it were, with a change to the Committee on Climate Change's 80% target CO2 greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. So net zero is now in law by 2050. But net zero is a substantial difference from the 80% target, in as much as not only have you got to get carbon out of the system, you've actually got to undertake a lot of carbon negative activities, which actually deal with what overhangs you're going to have in the system come 2050, where there are some things that will continue to produce carbon, and therefore you've got to undertake activities such as, I mean, my personal, one of my personal favourites in this is planting very large numbers of trees to absorb carbon and keep it sequestered. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, so that you've got a net zero input. Changing fundamentally a lot of agricultural practices so that you're actually storing carbon back in soils and the landscape, and various things such as that. So that's part of our target, and our target has to be reached not by various market mechanisms which sort of hit and hope that we're going to get some changes in some things, and some things will go faster than others in terms of transition, but that actually across the board we have transformed our society and our economy so that it works on a low carbon basis. And that means an accelerated transition to that low carbon target, and that transition means fundamentally altering how we produce energy, how we undertake the consumption of energy, how we heat and power our homes, what sort of energy efficiency there's going to be in our homes to make sure that we use energy in the most economical way possible, how we change fundamentally our modes of transportation with targets for getting not just vehicles becoming electrified and low carbon, we hope by early 2030s, but also dealing with the whole question of transport logistics and public transport as well. So a comprehensive change around in how our society works as far as green energy and carbon emissions and the daily dealings of our society in terms of energy and carbon use, and doing so in a way that is firstly a just transition from where we are now in terms of jobs and skills and industry, so that actually we are not simply as a result of the market deciding that there are going to be one or two new things around, leaving a whole pile of skills redundant, people redundant, industries trashed, that they're at the moment, that we need to transfer those skills and those industrial strengths from the brown economy to the green economy in a just and careful way over the period. And that involves, among other things, we think substantial changes in ownership of industry, and indeed a lot of things that should be in the public sector but haven't been in the public sector are not just out of the public sector because it seemed like a good idea at the time to privatize them, but actually they are now acting as a very substantial brake on those changes that need to be made. So, for example, the energy grid systems, which are absolutely the glue which hangs the power system together. And if we are to undertake a proper green transition, then we're going to have real control over how those systems deliver. And at the moment, they are by and large set up to deliver a brown energy system rather than a green energy system. And they are by and large set up to deliver all that from a very centralized basis, so that all the potential benefits that we can bring forward as far as local energy is concerned, devolved energy, getting people involved in being their own energy creators, managers and consumers, which will be a tremendous force in terms of the green transition, is very substantially handicapped by how the energy systems are set up at the moment and what they do and what they don't do. So the question of public ownership of those areas of energy which are so important in terms of making that green transition possible is a real issue for the long term. Now I say the long term because obviously we are not in power in the country at the moment, and some people will remember a certain brush with the electorate that we had just recently where we didn't get to where we thought we wanted to, and that's a very serious issue in terms of how the Green New Deal might work in the long term, because the Green New Deal is absolutely time dependent, that we cannot afford in terms of the speed at which we've got to make this green transition. We cannot afford any lags on the road to getting that transition underway. And one of the, I'm afraid, substantial things that the Conservative government is responsible for right now is actually putting a substantial lag into the time on that process. And they're doing that partly because they are relying entirely on market mechanisms to get the green transition going. And they are also relying on what I would say are substantially token methods of ticking various bits of the green boxes without actually putting in place the long-term effects of those changes. So for example, the stuff that was announced just recently in the Chancellor's summer statement on energy improvements in homes should have been about the beginning of a substantial long-term programme on an area basis to improve the energy efficiency of homes, to get those homes up to band C, something like that, by 2030 or so, and do that systematically across the country over a period of time with funding, with the skills training and backup to get the people to do that work. Instead, we got a one-year programme of vouchers for people in the private sector to undertake some energy changes in their home, which is, is better than nothing, but actually goes nowhere near dealing with the trajectory that we need to establish as far as the green transition is concerned. So we've got a problem right now that we've got a potential 5-year lag in that process before we get a Labour government back in place, which is going to be able to give this the shape and the framework and the taxation changes and the all those sort of things, which actually give you the framework and the background for the Green New Deal to really work. So the green recovery demands essentially are demands on the Conservative government to get their act together to use the idea of a recovery from the COVID pandemic to put in place those green measures which are actually going to get us back on track for that 2050 net zero target and for the green transition. And that's why those demands don't necessarily include the whole of what the Green Deal is about, but are about saying, well, if you go about a recovery on business as usual, then not only will you actually not be able to take advantage of what is involved in a green recovery, because it's got a lot of win-wins across the board in terms of industry, in terms of skills, in terms of establishing a lot of the framework for longer term green programs. But if you don't do that, then you will have missed a tremendous opportunity to use what we know is going to have to be, just as the original New Deal in the United States was concerned, there's a tremendous opportunity using primarily public funds to actually make that fundamental difference in the very short term and bring the jobs and skills with it and aid a recovery, but on a firm green direction. And so we've been consulting just recently in the Labour Party on how that green recovery might best work with that in mind and with those demands at the forefront. And that's, among other things, why we think things such as an urgent programme of energy efficiency in homes is so important, an urgent programme to uprate the speed at which large-scale renewables are deployed, but then right through the piece to actually fund and seed what are essentially shovel-ready and low-carbon programs across the country, so that in localities across the country, then those green installations, changes, district heating schemes, local energy plans, plans to develop much better waste plastic recycling, plans to tackle what I always say is 2/3 of the energy problem, which is heat and not power, can get underway predominantly and overwhelmingly at local level, so that the green recovery is spread across the whole of the country. Now, those are our immediate demands, as it were, on the government, but we need to be clear that that's not the Green Deal. That's not the Green New Deal. That is the foothills of where the Green New Deal goes. And if we can link those two together and keep ourselves on track for that green low carbon future, then we will have done a good job. But I fear at the moment the government is way off beam as far as that programme is concerned. And it's our job in the near future to make sure that we get back on track as far as possible and as quickly as possible, so that the longer term objective is still there in front of us. So that's my lot for today, Anna. Thank you. And I'm conscious I've gone on a bit longer than I should have done.
No, it was really interesting, and it's generated a lot of questions. So I think there'll be an opportunity to go into a bit more detail as well on some of those areas. I was going to ask a question, ask if Alex King is on the call. Alex had a question. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Alex.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for having me and for letting me ask me this question. Just 1 second. I had this written down. Bear with me. Yeah, so we know a cooperative Green New Deal is an opportunity, as you said in the introduction, to create thousands of new high-skilled jobs. But what if these skills are in short supply, for example, in the context of retrofit works, where there's a chronic skill shortage in trades like carpenters and joiners? So given this government is unlikely to invest in our young people to learn to work in green industries like retrofit, what can cooperatives do, and what can the cooperative party in particular do in terms of skills provision to ensure a Green New Deal is a success?
And on a very, thank you, Alex. Andrew Jenkins had sort of a question on a similar theme. So I wonder, Andrew, if you wanted to jump in as well about your question. Oh, you're muted.
Okay.
There we go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, I'm right in the middle of installing a heat pump in a 1863 Victorian farmhouse. And it's very striking that it requires a real combination of the skills that Alex just mentioned. and also experience, because you have to, I mean, for example, we're making quite a lot of use of the cellar for various reasons. And we had to put in a 3-phase electricity supply, which also enables us to put in charging points for electric cars. And the advice and the coordination and the skills are quite striking. So, I mean, I don't think these are in very big supply. And if we try and expand this rapidly, which we really need to do for large scale improvement in terms of domestic emissions, then we're going to need these skills, and not least the coordination skills as well. Where is this going to come from?
Great. And then on a slightly different topic, I have Margaret Gaskin was asking a bit about some of the terminology. Margaret, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, is Green New Deal really resonant with the British public? I mean, it's America. Nobody knows who Roosevelt was. As far as the American right wing is concerned, it was all handouts. So we've got no purchase with that. Whereas Green Industrial Revolution actually means something. That's something we learned about at school. This seems like a hopeful thing, a thing that provides jobs, a thing that provides prosperity, and seems like a much better, more muscular term than Green New Deal to me.
Great, thank you. Are you all right to start with those three, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, Alex and Andrew, I mean, you both really spotlighted one of the big issues in undertaking what we want to do with the speed we want to do it with, which is that when you look at these things in practice, you've got issues with supply chains, you've got issues with, as you said, with skills, and you've got issues with organising arrangements so that actually you can get things done on the basis that you need to get them done. And one of the things I think is still rather lacking in this debate is an appreciation of actually what the numbers really mean, just how much you've got to do. I mean, in terms of energy efficiency in homes, in order to make the contribution that a wholesale rise in energy efficiency homes will make to carbon reduction, you've probably got to uprate and insulate. And by insulate, I mean in many instances whole house treatment, not just putting a bit of stuff in the loft and cavity wall insulations. This is in many instances recladding homes that have that are single skin, that are not treatable by conventional means. In some instances, putting an entire external new wall on homes, as it were, there's a company called Energiesprong, or an organisation called Energiesprong, which is literally building outsides of homes off-site and craning them in and putting them on homes so they've got a new and energy-efficient cladding on the outside of the home without disruption to the home owners or home renters themselves. So there's such an enormous amount of work to be done, and over such a brief time scale, that we cannot simply afford to wait for someone to come along at some stage and produce some skills as the industry takes them up. We've actually got to introduce a program of skill transformation, and indeed we're talking about this among other things with a number of the unions that are involved in just transition, that we're clear that the skills, it's not just a longer term thing of actually translating the skills in, say, heavy industries such as power stations and various things such as that into green skills and green jobs, but it's actually the now of getting a lot of particularly young people who will actually have very little job opportunities right now, the opportunity to upskill themselves and train and be the backbone, among other things, of that energy efficiency transformation. And that can be done through local authorities providing places in FE and sponsoring and organising those programmes locally. We have in Labour called for a green low carbon army of people to be trained up to do this, and we are very clear that again this is not just a few people getting sponsored for training. This has to be a systematic programme, has to be properly funded, and it has to be run at local level across FE and local authority and apprenticeship providers in a coordinated fashion to get those skills uprated, so that when we do start getting to the volume that we hope we're going to get to, then we don't have a skills bottleneck, and we don't have, I mean, among other things, all the things that go with that, supply chain bottlenecks, all those things which also involve jobs and skills, and getting those right. So we're very clear that you need to do that across the board. We can do that. We can start to do that now with the administrations in various parts of the country. And indeed in Scotland, actually they're way ahead of England as far as this sort of activity is concerned. So we don't have to wait till a general election to get that underway, but it would be helpful if we had a Labour government in power that would actually put the money in at the centre to get this all going in the regions, in the localities. Margaret's question, I think it's a very interesting one, because and we've got actually the nomenclature for all this, I think now fairly firmly established as the Green New Deal. But I mean, as I tried to say in my opening remarks, what it is a question of actually getting us to net zero in the most socially just, the most inclusive, the most locally and decentralized driven way that we can, taking into account all these huge changes that need to take place, many of which are going to require very substantial central input, many of which are going to require local input. So, I mean, we've had this discussion among ourselves about, and indeed we did launch in the last election quite a lot of this activity under the heading of Green Industrial Revolution. I don't want to bore people on about focus groups and various other things, but actually both of those titles are not terribly recognizable by the public. And I'm not quite sure what the easy solution to that is. That I think the Green New Deal nomenclature is a good way of encapsulating what it is we want to do over the period. But I am conscious that one of the things we've absolutely got to do is to take the public fully along with us over the next period. And so maybe we should have a national competition for a better and snappier encapsulation for all this, getting green, getting there, or whatever, I don't know. But I mean, one of the problems in this area is that people, after about 5 minutes, go into detailed acronyms which pass most other people by. So among other things, I think we need to make sure that at each step of the way, we explain ourselves in a way that actually resonates with the public properly. And one of the things I do think about things such as local energy and local green matters is actually that really does, by its action, explain what we're trying to do in a way that titles don't. And so I think that's a very important part of the process, not just because it's a really good thing to do, because it actually brings home to people that actually, if you're running your own energy, you're running it on a green basis, you're involving yourselves and your community in the process, and that sort of encapsulates the change around in society we want to see as far as our green future is concerned. So maybe it's a thing by deeds rather than words that is going to make that difference in terms of public understanding.
Great. So I've got next three are sort of on the theme of communities and local government, which segues nicely because you sort of mentioned that in both of your answers. So Carole Donnelly, I've unmuted you. You had a question around local authorities and housing.
Hi, yeah, I kind of pretty new to the Co-op Party and everything.
Oh, we've lost you.
Oh, how do we get local authorities and social housing builders to embrace the modular, you know, the new pre-built housing onto the green agenda? In Coventry, we've got a private provider that's he's built one for Birmingham City Council, but he's really struggling to get on there. And we've linked into social mission, we've linked into local training, but we just can't seem to get a foot in the door. And it's the running costs for these properties. Yeah, we proved now are £1 a week. So, and the social housing, it's really needed. And just some advice that I can take back to them.
Great, thank you. And then we have Paul Harmon in Darlington. Paul had a question which is sort of a bit wider.
Yes, it's what can we actually do now locally? I'm secretary of the Co-op Party, but I'm actually forming a group through the larger membership of the local Labour Party, the CLP. So could Alan tell us where would we get the best bang for the buck, as it were, in terms of our local activity?
Great, thank you. And then Barrie has a sort of slightly different focus around sort of using green spaces and cemeteries. Barrie?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've just had to go to the front door.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Terrible timing. I didn't spot your video. Are you back?
Don't worry, I'm back.
Well, it's a lovely bookcase in the meantime. Great. Hi,
Barrie.
Alan.
Let's take that off. Yeah. Hi, Alan. I haven't spoken for some time. Simple thing, but I've taken an interest locally in our local cemeteries. And very interestingly, one or two of them are doing biodiversity reports. Now, I've got a personal interest in this because we're running out of space for people to be buried or whatever, and I want to be cremated, but I want my ashes put into the roots of basically almond tree. And I've put that into my will now. I just thought that was but when you look at the way in which we've currently got land available to us, the old style of 17th century, roughly, headstones is out of date. And actually what we could do is bring ourselves slightly more up to date. And I know the Co-op's got a keen interest in the way in which burials go on and so on. And I just wondered whether consideration could be given to that type of biodiversity for cemeteries, because we would have ability to direct from the executive.
Great. So a bottom-up suggestion there from Barrie. So quite diverse, but sort of local government, local community groups, housing, green spaces, cemeteries. What are the levers? You mentioned that we've got to get going now and can't only wait for a Labour government. So I guess what are you going to tell the 92 people on the call to go off and do as a result of joining us?
Right. Well, I think one of the most important things to be clear about, I think, is that green transformation actually benefits from every little bit of transformation that people can bring about being joined and added to the whole. So although I said, the numbers are very important to be clear about, nevertheless, every one thing that counts towards those large numbers is progress. And I think we've particularly got an opportunity here to get involved in some very practical things over the next few years. I'm, for example, pretty much involved in trying to get a hydro plant to be installed in an old, it's an old mill race at the head of the Itchen where it goes tidal. And I mean, that's something, and indeed there is those who are familiar with some of the stuff going on in Oxford will know that there's a similar size hydro plant actually at the confluence of two river channels, which does a tremendous amount of good work in terms of low carbon energy for local areas and for local businesses and so on. And so getting involved in those sort of processes, I mean, again, we've had the West Itchen, West Hampshire Solar Co-operative, getting involved in the aggregation of solar on people's roofs so that you can actually treat the solar roofs that people are developing as a virtual power station, getting involved in local energy trading so that can actually play a much greater role in using green energy as efficiently as possible with the shortest transmission lines possible. There are a whole pile of things that actually we can get involved in locally, and I personally would like to see, literally Labour Party branches and parties saying, right, we are going to engage as a district party in one of these projects ourselves, and not leave it to various other people to do, and then meet up monthly to criticise what they're doing. So practical action to get these things going at local level, because frankly that is where the green future is going to be. It is not going to be centralised. It's not going to be all about great big power stations on power lines going up across the country. It's going to be millions of inputs of energy and millions of different enterprises and activities to make us both energy efficient and energy producers in our own right. So that would, I think, be my suggestion for people. In addition, obviously, to make sure that we get a Labour government back as soon as possible. If there's any spare time in the meantime, then that's what you should be doing.
Great, thank you. And sort of, I'm going to do, if you've got time, a couple final questions. You mentioned about your hydro project and energy, so I had a couple of energy specific questions, if that's okay. One is from Evelyne. There we go, you're unmuted.
Okay, I'll just read out what I put on the chat.
Lovely.
So, about taking energy grid and system into public ownership, I'm wondering, will the Co-op Party be advocating to the Labour Party for energy managed by cooperatives? So it's not for profit and there's public accountability rather than state ownership. And I can give you the example of a company called NB Power. It's a cooperative in Canada. And so they're an independent co-op that owns all the energy infrastructure in the province of New Brunswick. So that's what we're talking about, a cooperative on a fairly small regional level, maybe county or bigger than county, regional. And they also do the energy generation and supply. So the public know that they're dealing with this one company locally and that it's a co-op. It's not directly the government, but it's under complete public scrutiny and it's not for profit.
Great, thank you. And then a question from Alex Hartley, who I believe is involved in local energy co-ops. Alex.
Hi, yeah, I'll take a leaf out of reading my question. I was wondering how the Co-op Party could support existing energy co-ops that not only generate renewable electricity and heat, but also tackle fuel poverty via energy efficiency work from energy advice and tackles whip-off tariffs, but also helps more vulnerable in our communities access grants for these home improvement energy-related measures. I'm a co-founder of CELSI, South East London Community Energy, Crew Energy. I've been involved with Co-ops London and GCDA, but I see, and across the country, there's 300-400 groups like us, but they're struggling to carry on their work despite all the environmental and economic opportunities, shall we say. You talked about the sort of piecemeal solution with the latest thing, which is something better than nothing. But we've had green armies of skilled people before to do this stuff through, the Energy Efficiency Advice Network. There used to be the EPC and Green Deal people that's trained up, and then there was no work because of the failure of the original Green Deal. So I think, aside from local co-op party branches asking their local community energy groups how they could help, which could be investing in community share offers, joining in projects, volunteering, what else could the co-op party actually do to support existing community energy co-ops? Because I've long thought there needs to be more integration and support.
Great. Okay. So a couple there about the co-op party, as well as sort of topics that I think Alan would probably love to touch on. And Evelyne, I'll direct you to our Ownership Matters report that we did a couple of years ago on democratic public ownership. It's a really interesting example you shared from Canada. I also looked at examples in New Zealand of sort of where, by virtue of paying the bills, the customer was seen as the owner of the infrastructure and therefore had a vote in how it was run and a stake in its success. Something that sort of discussed a lot with Alan as well is around how we regenerate our aging infrastructure. Do we really want to own a pipe or a wire that's close to breaking points? I'll pass over to Alan for that one.
Yeah, and Anna, I guess you'll be saying what the co-op parties are going to be doing over the next period, because although I am a co-op member, I'm not actually as up with that as you are. So the question of public ownership is something that's really bugged me over a period, in as much as, particularly in this field, then public ownership clearly has to mean something very different than what we might say old style statist nationalisation is about, because the energy system as a whole, as I've said, is going to be fundamentally working on a decentralised basis. And so if you actually have got some kind of system whereby you have a massive, great big national board, which is then sending decisions down the line to region, to city, to local areas, then most of that won't work. And so we need to look at public ownership as ownership in the public realm of these things at whatever level is most appropriate for their operation. So, we know that there are national monopolies which were privatized by the Tories some while ago, which will remain monopolies and should be in the public realm. And National Grid is an example of that. We actually need National Grid to provide us with the national glue of the energy systems. Why it's in the hands of a particular company is always been a question mark in my mind. What that company brings to that is very questionable, and the same goes for those systems that are just underneath it in terms of the distributed network companies. And we know from those distributed network companies two things. Firstly, that their practice is going to have to be broken up over the not too distant future, because the way the grids are going to work at local level is going to be very different from the way they work today, most particularly because you will have, I mean, literally we had 20 or 30 years ago, we had something like 80 points of entry for the system. That is various power stations that brought the power into the system and then transported around the country. Now we've got 1.5 million points of entry. And so we potentially got a very inefficient system of grid transportation around the country. And it needs to be changed. And you can envisage circumstances in the not too distant future where, say, somewhere like Bristol will have its own grid, have its own local grid, and it will balance its services within that local grid and then send those results up the line nationally. Now, there is every reason that Bristol should have ownership and management and running of that local grid. And that within that, various people who are producing and generating electricity locally should have ownership of that generation and jointly coming into that local grid. So it would be inappropriate for that local grid to be a sort of substation of a national arrangement, and it would be completely appropriate for it to be owned and managed and responsible and accountable to the local area it serves. So that's how I see the process of public ownership in energy. I'm not sure we completely got it right in terms of what we had to say about public ownership last time, but something that I think is a really important thing to get right in the long term, so that we have got the right tools in the right place at the right level to get these things working as best they can. And that's why I'm very much a devolutionist as far as public ownership is concerned.
Sorry, slow down myself. I guess sort of picking up, Alex, on some of your points around community energy groups and what more we can do. I think absolutely a first step could be that we encourage all our branches to contact their local community energy group. And if you don't know who that is, then Community Energy England has a directory and you can search by location. Sort of institutionally, we do a lot of work with Community Energy England and a number of groups. And sort of, I know that many of our cooperative councillors on this call and who aren't on the call have helped start community energy projects in their own area. Obviously, the environment for community energy has changed. So one of the things we're campaigning on at a Westminster level is around feed-in tariffs, putting back in place the incentives and subsidies to do community energy, because actually the big power generators get all sorts of state subsidy in various forms, but we aren't prepared to offer some preferential rates to communities coming together and building renewable infrastructure and making that decentralized contribution. So, you know, the sort of the way around is completely wrong. So there's that's our national policy platform that we're campaigning on, and there are plenty of people doing things. I think I would love to, for everybody, you know, if we've got 84 people on this call, if everyone was to go off and kickstart a local group, maybe get in touch with their mutual aid group that they've gotten to know over the COVID crisis and talk about the climate emergency and what a local response looks like, and get advice from Community Energy England, or from we can help to signpost you to other local projects who will have the bruises of the experience last time, so that it's easier for you. Wouldn't it be incredible if we had 84 solar installations and wind farms and hydro projects as a result of this conversation? So if you have some spare capacity, or you're involved in your community, or you'd like to make a difference, I think, you know, Alex's call to action there's a really important one, and you'll absolutely have sort of support and a platform to shout about the good stuff you're doing from the Co-op Party as well. So I think, although I can see there are still 4 hands up, and my chat has been going crazy with questions and ideas and examples that you've all shared, I am going to have to call it a day there. It's been hugely interesting, Alan, and we're really grateful to have your time and expertise on this call. I think it's sort of testament to the work you're doing that so many people have joined us. So thank you very much. Those of you on the call who want to read, I've put a link to the chapter that was published while we were talking. Have a look. It's obviously not our entire green agenda, which we debated at Co-op Party conference last October when we were allowed to see each other in person. So I've also put a link up to that policy paper, which is much wider and looks at sort of, you know, Adrian asked about biodiversity and farming, and that's in that wider piece, but not necessarily in the chapter today. But it's a much wider piece of work. And you can always email me at policy@party.coop if you think there are omissions or things you'd like to add, good examples that you're involved in locally. So Andrew Jenkins has just sent me an example from the Neighbourhood Forum's Climate Action Group. So I'd love to hear about what you're doing, and we can incorporate that lived experience and best practice into our platforms as well. So please feel free to get in touch. And I guess that is all from me. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you everyone for joining. Please look after yourself. And I think we'll see you next week, but I might not be the face you look at every Zoom meeting now we enter the summer. So there's going to be some exciting new topics and events being launched, but still in this Wednesday slot. So watch this space for more information. Keep an eye on your inbox. Yeah, have a great afternoon. Hopefully you've got nice sunshine like I do here. Bye everyone.
Okay, say thank you, Anna, very much for having me today, and thank you very much for all the work you're doing in this area, which is really appreciated by everybody involved in this, and so keep going on that.
Thank you.
Very kind. Thanks, Alan. See you all soon, I hope.